There's also a question in the chat, so we maybe
Oh,
answer that or later.
that would be later this evening. Okay, so. Oh, the water, it's on the chairs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I go with Kathy.
Oh.
This is a massacre. Yeah, but it's.
Well, should I answer? Maybe later. I remember the question. Yeah. Immediately, what in percent? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so, hello, my name is Xiao Zhao. I'm a doctoral student at the University of North Korean Studies. Thank you all so much for coming on presentation. Today it's about finding similarities and differences between athletics in Korea under Japanese rule and early North Korea. And I'll go a little bit further. Okay. And so this is the table of contents. First I go into the background, and then I go into before, and I kind of split it up. I did a periodization. I put it into three distinct eras, kind of, because this uses the athletics under the Japanese rule as a basis, because I'm a North Koreanologist, and I understand the North Korean athletics situation a lot better than I do during the colonial era. And I'll kind of go into the reasons behind that. But basically, the three areas I went into in detail was before the March 1st movement. So that was when athletics was very much after the Japanese started taking control. It was very controlled form of athletics. So basically, like, and then after that, they kind of went to an appeasement era. So it's like more so like, okay, we're going to control athletics and say what they are, and then the second part we're going to appease. But then during wartime, they went back to complete control. So it's kind of from one end to the other end, back to the other end. And I felt that in these three areas it was kind of distinct. So first I'll go into the background. After the liberation of the Korean Peninsula, the power vacuum in the north was filled by a Soviet assault government, and the Soviet branded communist philosophy served as the guiding principle for athletics in the background. And so, but there are gaps in prior research on athletics in the early DPRK because they focus almost entirely on Soviet influence and philosophy. So it's just like they just start in 1945, and it's like there's no presence of what was before that, and it's kind of going into this Constantine on time. And it does little to examine the legacy of the Japanese occupation, as I just said, and they're almost entirely in the Korean language. And so there are some studies on athletics during the Japanese era, but whenever there is one, it always goes into the southern, because all of the academics are South Korean, and so there's no real connection into the northern. And people who study North athletics, they just know it during the DPRK era. So we're just kind of trying to connect these two eras. And so the research goals are, first, I try to grasp the athletic situation during different periods of the Japanese occupation, as I just described, understand the appeal and context of early North Korean athletic policy, and then draw parallels between athletics during the Japanese occupation and early North Korea. And so kind of understand its connection. All right, so before the March 1st movement, from 1885 to 1919. And so it's like, why start in 1885? And that's because that's when the first gymnastic classes led by foreign missionaries started. And so we kind of focused mostly on modern athletics that came in from the West, but we also mentioned the development of traditional athletics. Up to this point, I feel like the scale would get too big if you try to go to the history of traditional athletics. The first athletics tournament in Korea was in 1890. All primary schools had mandated gymnastics classes from 1895 onward, and then they started to introduce some of the more basic ones, track and field, football, and swimming. And you can kind of see what a gymnastics class might have looked at the time, which is very basic movements. And so then after the 1905 Rusa Treaty and the loss of Korean sovereignty, military gymnastics began to be taught in schools. So it was used in schools, but the Korean intellectuals were also trying to use military gymnastics as kind of a form of resistance. But after 1911, they stopped it. They stopped doing military-style gymnastics. This was only for about 6 years in Korean schools, and then they returned back to being more normal style of gymnastics. And the YMCA started to play a strong role after the 1905 Oslo Treaty. So they held athletics meets, they did tournaments, they did lectures, and they also introduced baseball, basketball, and volleyball. And in this picture, you can see Gillette. He's the guy who introduced baseball, and time was, are Koreans going to lead athletics organizations or are Japanese going to lead athletics organizations? And so both organizations started to spring up at this time, although on a much small scale. So there's modern athletics going on in Gyeongsong, in modern day Seoul. So there's going to be boxing and table tennis. This is what the Koreans are organizing. And they're also doing traditional athletics like Shigum, Korean wrestling, or archery. But the Japanese organizations, they have the school to fall back on, so they organize the school athletics meets, and then government organizations, and they did repress the Korean-led traditional and modern athletics meets to some extent, but really you have kind of these two organizations holding two different forms of athletics. And so I looked at this era only, and I said, what are the parallels with early North Korea? This is an image of one of the first athletics tournaments to go on in the 1940s in North Korea. Modern athletics were already established, and they could be resumed. So they were established in this era, and that's how they got to North Korea. Some disciplines, such as baseball, were dropped because they just weren't played in the socialist sphere. There's a lot of theories on that. Athletic tournaments became a normal part of society. So from 1946, there were numerous tournaments held in North Korea, and they continue all the way to this day. And the athletic tournaments started all the way back during this era. And military athletics were nothing new to North Korea. I mean, athletics became connected to the military almost from the outset. And this was a huge part of North Korean athletic curriculum and just how they put it through the entire society. It was the DPRK introduced Soviet-style national athletics. And so then traditional athletics also survived this era. So they featured in early North Korean athletic tournaments becoming emphasized beginning in 1956. And so this is the second, probably most interesting era. It's between the March 1st movement in 1919 and the Second Siam Japanese War. And this is when the athletics began to be appeased by the Japanese government. So there were mass protests in 1919. It led to the Japanese government general said they shifted from control to appeasement. So Korean-led organizations and newspapers are now allowed. Freedom of media association is now allowed. And so the government general encouraged athletics. And I was like, why did they start to do this? And they said they want to use it as a means to stoke inter-organizational, inter-provincial conflict. So for example, if you have Seoul and you have Pyongyang playing games every year, and all of a sudden there will be this regionalism that will increase, and that was the Japanese government theory at the time. And they're trying to boost public morale by encouraging wholesome amusements. So they're basically using traditional games in the provinces to kind of boost their own policy. And they organize traditional games in rural areas to kind of expand the influence of their government. And so it's the same split that we had before. We have Japanese-led Athletics Association and the Korean-led Athletics Council. And the names are really, really similar in the original Korean, but I just decided to translate the Japanese one as association and the Korean one as council, just to kind of distinguish them. But the Japanese one was notable for their promotion of track and field and winter sports, and they held tournaments. And from 1984, they held preliminaries for all of the Navy Shrine tournaments. They had that influence. But the Korean organization was supported by Korean athletes, Koreans who studied abroad. They were primarily active only in Gyeongsong, or only in Seoul. They really weren't in the provincial areas. And they were meant to set up organizations for each athletic discipline, and they had a higher participation rate than the Japanese counterparts. And after 1931, they founded a research council for researching and leading athletics. So really, the Japanese organization had a little bit of contribution, but really it was mostly the Korean-led organizations that kind of contributed to the development of athletics on the whole. And so we've got the role of the YMCA, as I mentioned earlier. The big taking point about them is that they're active in the provincial areas. There you can see on the map that's where they had branches that were operating athletic tournaments and athletic classes and things like that. They were both active in the current capitals of the North and the South, but they were really had a little bit more access than the other two organizations did. Then the school also had an important role. The Japanese government in general wanted more athletics at schools to keep tighter controls. So like, if we can keep athletics within within the schools, then we can control it. And a new syllabus in 1927 declared a shift from a primarily gymnastics focus to a focus on ball sports and other disciplines. Then there was the Great Depression, and farmers were leaving villages, farming disputes, agricultural cooperatives. And so the government general established the Village Traditional Games Association, and this encouraged traditional games like Korean wrestling and seesaw and swing and all of these traditional style Korean games, but they blocked large scale events into the mid 1930s. But really the main point was that they wanted to reduce expenses, reduce injuries, and if we organize people like this, then we can have kind of better control over the society. And that's the Japanese government was doing all of this. So after the 1931 Mukden incident, the war on the Korean border signaled the shift of government policy towards the reign of terror and national assimilation. So there was no longer, the appeasement started to go away after 1931, but there was still a little bit of freedom until 1937. So like the Bills and Richards Council was still active, and Korean athletes were more successful at these All Japan tournaments every single year. There were more participating, more medals and things like that. And so when we go to early North Korea, we compare we have this era of appeasement. How does it parallel with early North Korea? And so North Korean authorities, unlike Japanese authorities, did not allow independent organizations. And so basically each of these bullet points is they stopped newspapers, they made their own athletics alliance, and they restricted the religious part of it. So basically like things like the YMCA or the independent newspapers that powered athletics during the colonial era could not exist in the early North Korean era. So the picture I chose here is Soji Tae-hyuk. This is the land reform movement picture, and it's saying that we're giving the land back to the farmers. And then you see this kind of symbol over to the right here. That was the original logo of the Rodong Shinmun, the current newspaper of the North Korean government. It was called Jongro back then. And it is parallel with early North Korea. So Japanese authorities used pre-existing entertainment to quell regional dissent, but North Korean authorities took a different approach, and they introduced education and modern athletics for the same purpose. And so they did the Munmeng Peichi, or the literacy eradication movement from 46 to 49, and then they started holding public health gymnastics in the morning and evening at workplaces, schools, and villages from 1948, and they really did a lot to kind of use education and modern athletics to quell regional dissent, in my opinion, rather than what the Japanese did, which is to kind of use what was already existing there. So it's a different approach. And North Korean authorities brought modern athletics to the whole populace, while modern athletics under Japanese rule was for elites only. So basically, during the Japanese rule, really only the Koreans who had gone to school and were in the higher echelons of society got to do Western athletics. Everyone else was still out in the villages. 80% of the population was farmers, and they were just doing kind of traditional stuff. So this is the last section, very short. It's basically just after the Sino-Japanese War, Japan changed the ruling policy completely to the Hangin-pa Japanization. And so school athletics became military, Japanese focused, so you have like kendo and judo are included. And then the athletics councils were dissolved, ball sports were discouraged in 1939, and then prohibited entirely in 1943. So the last athletics tournament was actually 3 years before liberation, so there's like basically 3 years of no athletics at all going on in Korea under the Japanese rule. And so when you look at early North Korea, after years of increased militarization by the Japanese government, the populace had a chance to re-engage in normal athletics. And so the DPRK encouraged military athletics in 1949, but they never prohibited normal athletics like the Japanese did. So even though there was a war going on, North Korea still had sports, and they sent people to international competitions for sports, which is completely different than how the Japanese handled the situation in Korea. So here's the conclusions, and we kind of go to this direct comparison. And so under the Japanese government in general, you had the introduction of modern and military athletic disciplines and tournaments. North Korea continued and expanded that. Under Japan, you had traditional athletics surviving, partially encouraged, but in North Korea, kind of the same situation until the 1950s when traditional athletics were really emphasized as they went away from Soviet and Chinese influence in the 1950s. And then there was a partial appeasement of organizations in the Japanese government in general, but in North Korea, there was a total repression of organizations. Japan rural policy used existing games. Under North Korea, rural policy had literary education, new athletics opportunities. And so it's, under Japan, athletics were the elite. Under North Korea, athletics for all. And then regular athletics, during wartime, allowed during wartime. So you can kind of see, just at a glance, how the main points of the policy were prepared. And so here's my final thoughts. Although the policy of the North Korean authorities was repressive, they were not unprecedented. So there wasn't really anything completely new about how the policies were so repressive. So it's not hard to imagine people at the time accepting the policy. Virtually every athletics organizer under both regimes added some sort of ideological element. So if you're going to go to the athletic meet at the school, you're going to get the Japanese culture. Or if you're going to go to the one organized by the Joseon Athletics Council, then you're going to get exposed to Korean nationalism. Or if you go to the YMCA, you're going to get exposed to evangelical Christianity. And then as the DPRK came in, the early North Korean authorities, they went to the Soviet-style socialism. So basically every athletics meet that you went into had some sort of ideology within it. And so it probably wasn't very hard at the time for them to kind of accept this new ideology coming in because there were just so many ideologies and so much change going on. And ultimately, the North Korean policies engaged with more people and they gave them more athletic opportunity just on a basic athletic level. And so you can kind of see where that helped stir public support early on. And there was a lack of cultural repression. So there's no repression of the Koreanness involved as what it was during the Japanese occupation. And more athletic opportunities made their policies more fluent, so I was saying. So congratulations, we made it to the end of the presentation, and thank you so much for your time. Yes.
So thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. I think your point about the comparison came through very well. It was fascinating. But I'm still curious whether you have another argument more overreaching, which could be insights that could be applied maybe to other cases or more general beyond the case of North Korea. Second one is more specific. In your last conclusion presentation, you wrote that there was lack of cultural repression in North Korea. Case of one North Korea was repressed and it's certainly not cultural.
Well, as for whether I have any kind of overarching conclusion that can be applied to another case, I think that I need to get a little bit deeper into my work before I can say anything concrete on that. But the second part you were saying, like, why the repression of the religion, why was that accepted? And I think that it's because in the same time you're taking away all this land from the landlords and giving it to the people, that you're taking away the land from the church as well. So it's kind of all bundled into one. And I think that because, my hypothesis would be, it's just that because the people were so excited about getting ownership of their land, the concerns of the Christians weren't necessarily so pronounced and heard in the society, but that's just my theory on it.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
So, thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. And I was wondering, one thing. First, you showed us the 1931, the Japanese intrusion into Manchukuo, and Mukta incidents. Yeah, I didn't really catch your point. So there was a change in the policies toward sports at that time. But what did the Japanese think to do or how to employ all these well-trained young men? Did they also use Korean people to join the army, the Japanese army, and to help the intrusion into Manchukuo?
I would say that wasn't the policy at 1931 at the time, but I would say that by the time you got to 1937, they were like, there was a transition where they were like, okay, these are going to be athletics for the purpose of conscripting young men. And that was going to happen mainly towards the time when they were already at war. But I would say that the most important about the Mukden incident is, the most important thing about it is that the government policy shifted. So before they were just trying to appease Korea and not necessarily use it or assimilate it. And then they started to move towards the policy of assimilation. And then once you have the assimilation done, then you can use them as soldiers. But I'm really not an expert in the military, so somebody else might be able to answer that question better than me.
I think this is one more question.
this,
The one,
on which table?
the one. I'm sorry, the one, yes. I was just curious, you like the time until 1919,
Mm,
the 1919 to
30 seconds,
1937,
yes,
and then 37 to 45, right?
yes.
And you're talking about this, I am talking about last possible regular athletics for the
Yeah.
I was just curious, on the, just could go.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
And then you are talking about on the right side, there's this more point of authorities. And you said that regular athletics allows for working. What kind of work are you talking about? Is that like, because North Korea was established a little bit later after the
Yes,
World War II.
yes.
So what kind of work?
Well, with the Japanese government in general, I was talking about the athletics that occurred when the Japanese started to, like, you first had the Moke incident, which was a little bit of, military mobilization, but then after 1937, you had the, Sino-Japanese War, and then when you go into the Sino-Japanese War, it's basically kind of when wartime starts for everybody in Korea. And so when I'm talking about the Japanese authorities, I'm like, how did they go from 37 to 45 when Japan was technically at war? How did they treat the Korean citizens under that wartime, comparing to the North Korean regime, which had a war from 50 to 53, and so how they treated them during that time?
Okay, that's the Korean War.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you. I just forwarded it.
yeah. And there's maybe a chat, but I don't know. I'll do it very quickly. Congratulations on a great talk and the interesting outline of sport history in North Korea. Do you have any data on how that sport style of life in North Korea that seems to be common over there possess an influence on the longevity of life, frequency of depression, heart disease, and cancer? Well, I think that it's really hard to get data on things like that because the North Korean government doesn't really publish statistics, like in general, and it's very hard to do surveys because when you have humanitarian organizations going in and trying to survey everybody, basically they run into the issue of like they're not allowed to move in certain places, and they're only allowed to go in during certain this, and so it's really like a statistical black hole in North Korea, and so it's hard to say, but I mean, just basically like. Athletics was always considered to be something in the socialist philosophy is very important for production of the society, or for the industrial production, and also for the national defense. And it's kind of gone from that to the present day. And the athletics has never really been about the individual. Some South Korean scholars are arguing that during the Kim Jong-un era, there's a little bit more of a leisure athletic going on. But really, it's never about the health of the individual, and that's not why they're doing it. It's only been very recent that this has come up in North Korean propaganda. Really, it's more about the health of the collective and how to make them so the society.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation.